Are you tired of bloated frameworks that take forever to set up just to make a button work? What if I told you there is a tiny but really famous JavaScript framework that feels like Vue or React but only takes 10 lines of code to get started? That's Alpine.js. It's a lightweight, powerful, and honestly, it's one of my favorite tools for making front-end interactions super fast. Today I am going to show you 10 cool Alpine.js features that you can start using right now. And trust me, by the end of this video you will want to try it on your next project. But before we dive in, if you are new here, my name is Adam. I've been a Magento and Adobe Commerce developer for over 15 years, and I also teach on Udemy, where more than 7,000 students have already taken my courses. And I'm proud to say I have 2 bestsellers there. Thank you so much. And here is something special for you. If you check the description below, you will find a big discount link to my courses. That means you can get access to everything I teach, whether it's Alpine.js, Magento, Adobe Commerce, or Hua development, at a huge discount and take your skill to the next level. Oh, and if you find value in this video, hit the like button so more people can discover Alpine.js, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss future tips like this. Alright, let's dive in. So I already prepared the documentation, so the normal HTML file where I added the Alpine.js with the latest version, and also integrated here the Tailwind CSS if we would like to use this for styling this element. And now I would like to start first with the Xdata. So basically Xdata is where it all starts. Xdata basically stores the information in your Alpine.js component. And now I would like to also create the one example about the Xdata where I will add the counter, and for example if the button is clicked, then we will see this on the front end directly. So let's get started with the first component, with the Xdata. So here let's add the div, and then let's append the Xdata where I can add the counter. So basically here in the Alpine.js you can append Alpine.js like this, Xdata, and then here you can append, for example, the count 0, and this is basically the information what is stored within this Alpine.js component. And after that we can create the button, and based on this interaction, based on the button click, we will increase this counter. So here let's create the button, and with the add click you can add interaction to this button. So basically here I'm appending the click event to this button, and if this click event is appended, then with the count we are referencing to this variable basically, and with the plus plus we can also increasing this counter basically. And then let's also add the text increment. And now let's also create additionally a paragraph tag where we will show this counter on the front end. And here you can add the text, count, and then you can append additional span element. And basically here in the span element, using the X text, you can have access to this counter, and basically here you can call the counter. And if you save this, you will see we have the button, and then if it's clicked, then the counter is basically increasing. So once again with the Xdata we appended the count variable and added the 0 as an initial state, and here by the button with the add click we are appended here the counter basically, and with the plus plus we can this increasing this number, and then with the X text count we are showing this within this span element. And basically this is the Xdata presentation, and this is the most powerful tool and feature within the Alpine.js, because with the xData you can store information within your Alpine.js component, and within this Alpine.js component you can interact with this value basically. And now let's continue with the xbind. So basically with the xbind you can connect Alpine.js functionality into your component, and for this let's also create additional element. So now div, and then let's create the xData first, where I will store some information. So basically here let's create the flag is active and set to true. So here with the xData we already created the flag boolean variable and set to true basically, and then let's create the button. And here within the button let's use the shorthand class. With this you can bind, for example, class or attribute to this element, and this is the xbind basically with the shorthand. And now let's check the is active. So basically if the is active is set to true, then you can also add here inline if statement basically, and then let's appending the bg green 500 for example, and the text white. So basically here we are checking if the is active is true, then we are appending this Tailwind CSS class here. And here also if it's not true, then we can also append additionally another classes basically. And also text black. And also with the click, let's add also this click directive. So if this button clicked, then the is active can toggle to false. Let's also add here the text toggle. What we made here, once again we used the xbind, that is shorthand with the class, but this could be also a HTML attribute toggle. And here with the is active we are checking if it's true. Then if it's true, then we are appending the background green color and also the text white. But if the button is clicked, then we are toggling between the true and false state, and if it's false, then adding this gray background to this button with the text black. So let's check this on the front end. So if the button is clicked, then the background color is also changed back to gray, and also the text is changed to text black. So this was the presentation about the xbind, and now I would like to talk about the xshow. With the xshow you can also show elements on the front end. Here you can also check the state, and if something is false, then you are not showing this element, and if it's true, then you are showing. So basically this is the display none. So the element is already existing in the DOM, but you are not showing this on the front end. So with the xshow you can set this visibility, but basically the element is only hidden like with the display none. So for this let's also create additional example. Let's create the div xData, and then let's also set here the flag to open false. Here we also created this flag and set this to false. And now I will also create additional button, And if its button is clicked, then we are also toggling the open between false and true, and based on this flag we will also adjust this with the xShow and checking this state, this open state. So if it's true, then we are showing this element. If it's not true, we are not showing this element on the front end, we are just hiding this one. So we are created the X data with the open false. And now let's create the button. And here also let's append the click event listener to this button with the usage of the @click. And here, if this button clicked, then let's toggle between the open state. So here we are setting this to false if it's true, and setting it to true if it's false. And then toggle menu. And now let's create also the additional div where we will show and check the xShow state, the Alpine.js directive, and based on this xShow we will also show this one. So there are also some suggestions already. xShow, and then check the open. Also let's add here some Tailwind classes for styling. And basically, if you would like to know more about the Tailwind CSS as well, don't forget to subscribe into my new YouTube channel, because later on I'm also planning to create full free courses about the Tailwind CSS as well, and also more courses about the Alpine.js as well. And Alpine.js combined with the Tailwind CSS, I think this is the very powerful tool to make every website interactive and simple with the Tailwind CSS. This will look good already on the front end. And also, if you had some experience already with the Alpine.js or Tailwind CSS, don't forget to write your comment or some notes here below the videos. Thank you so much. So we already created the xShow, and here let's also add some text, drop down, content here, and let's save this and click to this button. So if it's clicked, then we have the element, and if it's clicked again, then the open is set back to false. That means we have here the state false and we are not showing this element. But basically, if you are checking here, the element is also here in the DOM. So with the xShow we are just hiding this element from the front end. We are setting the display none, or if the open is true, then we are simply showing this. But now I would like to jump to the second feature from the Alpine.js. This is the xif. So basically with the xif you can completely remove element from the DOM, so not just hide them, because with the xif you can check some state or some if statement basically, and if it's true, then you are just simply removing the element from the page and not hiding. So this is the big difference between xShow and xif. For this, let's also create an example. Let's create the div xData, and then let's add the show. Show false. So basically here we also created this flag, and based on this flag we will also check this in the xif, and if this flag is true, then we are showing this element. If it's false, then we are not showing this element, and this element will be also not visible in the DOM. So you will see this also later on. Let's also create the button with the click event, bind it, and here with the xShow, toggle message. And then with the template you can, so if you are writing like this, with the template you can create dynamic template based on this template structure, and here with the usage of the Alpine.js you can bind this with the xif basically. So with the xif, if the open or if the show is true, then you have this template element visible on the front end. If it's false, then this element is completely removed and not visible in also the front end and also in the DOM. So you will see this also. And here let's create the paragraph. This element basically only exists when show is true. So we can hover this element. So we have the X template. So you will see we don't have this paragraph tag here on the DOM, but if this button is clicked, then you will see this element is exists only when show is true. And in this case, this is true because we are set this with the click directive to true. And if I'm clicking again to the message, then it's removed also from the DOM. So this is the big difference between xShow and xIf, that the xShow is only hiding the element using the display none, but with the xIf, the element is completely removed from the DOM. And let's jump to the x4. So with the x4, you can loop through to the array or object basically, and you can show this element on the front end. So if you have some information, for example, from the backend, some stored information in the array form, with the x4 you can loop through these elements basically, and you can show these items in the front end. So for this, let's also create one example. So with the x data basically you can also store array, but this can be also come from the backend, so dynamically. So here let's create the items. And then in the array form, let's create, for example, apple, and then banana, and then cherry. So we already created these xData items, and this is the array with the apple, banana, and cherry. And with the x template, with the x4 bind it to the template, we can loop through to these items, basically this item from this array, and then we can show this on the front end. Let's create a template x4, and then here basically we have access to the item like this, and also to the index in items. And here with the key you can set this to index, so this will be the key in this case. So with the x4 item index in items, you can loop through to the items array and set this to item, and here with the key you can set the index as a key. And here with the paragraph x text, then you can use the index +1, and also with the plus you can show the item here. And as you can see here, we have the apple, banana, and cherry on the front end in this paragraph text. So once again, we created the items array with the apple, banana, cherry item contained in this array, and with the x4 you can loop through to this items array and set the items, also the index, in items array, so in this syntax. And then we are setting here the key as an index, so we are showing this here. This is the key based on the index, and then we are showing the item itself from this items array. So you see how powerful the x4, if you are using Alpine.js, is only one line code, and you have this iteration by this array, and you are showing this directly on the front end. So let's jump to the X model. So basically X model feels like magical from my point of view. It connects directly to the input field, to your data, And for this, let's also create the example, the div xData, and then here let's create the additional name field, set empty. So this is empty, but with the X model, you can directly bind input value. So if something is typed into the input field, then we can also synchronize this with the name variable, and then we can also show this on the front end. So basically, let's create also the input type text. And here also let's use the X model and then the name. That means every type character will be synchronized with the name variable here. And then also let's add the placeholder, enter your name. And then we can also show this name in the paragraph, hello, and then let's create a span element where we are binding the name with the X text, what we already learned by the previous example. So, as you can see here, we have the input field and the hello, and if something is typed here, let's say Adam, then this is directly synchronized with the paragraph text. So basically here we already used the xData name, but this is empty basically as a default value, and with the X model we already synchronizing the input type with the name field. So if something is typed into this input field, then it's directly synchronized with the name, and with the X text name we are showing this directly into this span element. Let's talk about the X transition now. So Alpine has transition baked right in. So basically it is also integrated feature into Alpine.js. If you would like to some smooth animation or fade when showing or hiding element, then it's the perfect place to use the X transition basically. And how does it work? Then I will just present you with the xData. Let's create here also the flag, open and set to false. And let's create the button with the click directive. So we are binded here the click event listener. And then based on this click, let's toggle the open state between true and false. And then let's add the div xShowOpen, and here use the X transition, and also let's add some class with the size. And now let's check this on the front end. You will see this animation, what I already used with the X transition basically. So this is popping up, and if it's hidden, if the button is clicked. So this is very nice if you would like to use some animation, and basically here you can also add additional parameter like secondum or some other animation tools with the use of the X transition. Here this is the basic if you would like to hide or show some element in this animated way. And now let's jump to the $refs, and sometimes you just need to grab an element directly. So with the $refs you can reference to this element. So basically, for example, if you have some form with the input field and button, and if you would like to, for example, set the focus on this input field if the button is clicked, then this is the best place to use the $refs. So with this you have directly access to the DOM, And for this I also prepared you one example. Let's create the div with the x data, but in this time we are leaving this empty. And then let's create the input here with the xref input, and also this is the type text. And also the placeholder focus me. And then let's create the button, and here let's add the $add click, and then here the $refs input, and then you can say focus. So that means if this button is clicked, then the input will be in focus. So this is the input field, and if this button is clicked, then you will see this blue border is set. So the input field is already in focus, because here we are use this $refs input, so reference to this input field, and set the focus. And here you can also use the xref additionally, and in this case if the button is clicked, then we are setting here this border, so basically this input field is in focus. So you can imagine this is very helpful if you are using some validation, for example, and if some field is not valid or the validation is failed, but if you would like to send the form with the submit button, you can also directly highlight this form where the validation is failed with the usage of the $refs. And now let's switch to the $watch. So basically with the watch let you respond to data changes in a real time. And for this, let's also create additional example. Let's create the x data, and here we can set again the counter basically. To 0. Let's also add here the x init. And basically here with the x init you can create the initial state, and with the x init or within the x init you can use this $watch, so you can respond to data change in real time, and within the x data with the usage of the watch you can, for example, create console log, and based on this console log you will see the value directly in your console in your developer tab. So let's use here the $watch. And here we would like to check, in this case, or watch the count and the value. And then check this in the console log basically. Count change to value. And now if you are checking the console, and if the button is clicked, then you will see we are watching this count changes basically with the usage of the $watch, and here you will see the counter is increasing and the count change to and the actual number. So with the $watch you can reference to the respond data changes, so you can basically subscribe to these changes, and if something is changed on this variable or on this data, then you can add interactions. So basically here I only binded the console log to make this visible here on the developer console. And last but not least, I would like to talk about the dispatch. So dispatch lets one component fire an event and another component can listen for it. So basically with the dispatch you can communicate between the Alpine.js component, and for this I also prepared you one example. Let's create the data, and here let's create the button with the appended click event, and here let's use the $dispatch, and here let's create the event notify. And additionally, let's create here the message hello from Alpine. So if the button will be clicked, then we are using this $dispatch, and we will send this message information basically from this to the another element with the usage of the dispatch. And additionally here, let's create the extra Alpine.js component. So this is the first component, and this will be the second component. And here let's create the xData and then the notify window. So basically, if the button will be clicked, then we are sending this hello from Alpine, and we would like to use this in the alert window. Let's create the alert. Here with the $event detail message, you will have access to this message, and if the button is clicked, then we are communicating between this element using the $dispatch, and we will see this already in the alert window. Send event, and you will see hello from Alpine. Here with this we presented the communication between two Alpine.js components, and with the dispatch we are creating this event with the message hello from Alpine, and here basically with the @notify, and then here we are sending the window object to do this message. So if this message is visible, basically if it's created with the clicking of this button, then we are showing this directly to the alert window. But based on this dispatch, you can also transfer data or information between Alpine.js component, so this is very powerful. I wanted to present you why I really like the Alpine.js and these approaches, but here later in this YouTube channel I'm also planning to create bigger courses, full free tutorials about Alpine.js as well, and also combined with the Tailwind CSS. So if you would like to know more about the Alpine.js, and if you would like to not miss this opportunity to learn more about the Alpine.js and Tailwind CSS, please subscribe into my new YouTube channel, and if you like this content, please send me a like button here. Thank you so much. And if you would like to know more about the Alpine.js in general, with the combination with the Magento or Adobe Commerce system, with the usage of the Viva theme for example, feel free to check the description below, where I'm also sharing a big discount about my bestseller courses from Udemy. So thank you so much for your time, and see you in the next video. Bye!